I'm going to give you the ultimate guide to attorney's fees in personal injury cases. This includes car accident cases, slip and falls, and much more. You need to know how much attorneys can charge so that you do not get overcharged. After all, you want to maximize the value that gets put in your pocket. I'm Florida personal injury attorney Justin Ziegler. The amount of attorney's fees in a car accident case depends upon the state where you were injured. In Florida, where I practice, an attorney cannot charge more than 33 1/3% of the total settlement before a lawsuit, or 40% of the total settlement after a lawsuit, and certain things have occurred. In addition to attorney's fees, the attorney is allowed to charge reasonable costs. Let's take a look at Ryan's case where the total settlement was $300,000. My attorney's fee was only 33 1/3% of the total settlement. However, I had costs which were additional. In his case, the at-fault driver died, so I needed to appoint a personal representative to represent the defendant driver. So that's a cost that typically doesn't happen in most cases. After attorney's fees and costs and paying the out-of-pocket medical bills and workers' compensation lien, Ryan got $187,371 in his pocket. In this case, the attorney's fees and costs together were about 35% of the total settlement. Ryan was driving a car down the street and another driver was coming in the other direction and made a left-hand turn into Ryan, so the other driver was at fault. Ryan broke his leg and required surgery at the hospital. So in Florida, the average attorney's fee is 33 1/3% of the total settlement. That's because most cases settle before a lawsuit. Now, an attorney is allowed to get reasonable costs above the 33 1/3%, but in most cases that settle before a lawsuit, the costs are not that large. Let's look at a case where a motorcycle driver was heading straight down the road and an oncoming truck came and made a left-hand turn, and they crashed, and the motorcycle rider flew off his bike. He ultimately needed leg surgery and finger surgery, and we settled his case for $445,000. That case settled before a lawsuit. So my attorney's fees and costs combined were 33.9% of the total settlement. After attorney's fees and costs and paying back my client's final out-of-pocket medical bills, he received $263,522 in his pocket. One of the nice things about attorney's fees in personal injury cases, again, car accident cases, slip and falls, and other type of cases, is you do not have to pay the attorney any money up front. The attorney is only paid money if he receives a check from the insurance company or other responsible party. You don't owe the attorney any money if he or she doesn't recover compensation for you. However, attorneys do their best job by trying to select cases that they think they're going to get paid on. While there's no guarantee of recovery in any personal injury case, after practicing for 17 years, I have a pretty good idea of which cases I think I'm going to get a payout in. In Florida, 40% is a reasonable attorney's fee, but only if a lawsuit is filed and the defendant responds with an answer to the lawsuit or the time for the defendant to answer the lawsuit has passed. If you hire an attorney, it's often in the client's best interest to settle the case before a lawsuit, because then the total attorney's fee is only 33 1/3% of the settlement as opposed to 40%. Many cases can get settled without a lawsuit. Now, the attorney's fees are taken from the total settlement amount before your medical bills are paid. The attorney in Florida, where I practice, has to put this in the contract, but I've never seen an attorney who does not have this in the contract. Now, just as important as knowing what the attorney's fee is, you need to know what costs an attorney cannot charge you for. I'm going to discuss a lot of costs that an attorney cannot charge you for. Now, again, costs are in addition to attorney's fees, but the good news is this past year, my average cost was under $100 for each case. I've even had cases where the costs were $0 or $7 only. Here's a case where an Uber driver was driving, heading straight down the road, and another van made a left-hand turn into the Uber driver. The Uber driver did not take an ambulance to the hospital. However, a few hours later, he went to the hospital, and he was actually admitted into the hospital and spent several days in the hospital. He did not have any surgery at the hospital. He had a fracture of one of the lamina of his vertebra. Now, we settled the case against the other driver's insurance company, CNA, for $260,000, and my attorney's fee was $86,700, which is 33 1/3% of the settlement. My client, after my attorney's fees, costs, and paying his Medicaid, lien, and out-of-pocket medical bills, received $167,982 in his pocket. In other words, he got 64 and 2/3% of the total settlement. Now, if you're saying, whoa, Justin, you got a lot of money from that total settlement, here's my response. At first, the hospital was trying to collect $99,000 back, and I did everything I could to pressure them to accept Medicaid's payment of only $4,000, and they wrote off the $95,000 or so balance. That essentially put an extra $95,000 in my client's pocket. Now, I don't think my client would have been able to do that without an attorney. I don't think he would have known how to do that. I don't think he would have pressured the Medicaid HMO insurer to do that. So there's a lot more to looking at than just saying, oh, whoa, I'm going to have to pay 33 1/3% of the total attorney's fees in a case. There's so much an attorney can do in so many cases that can actually, even after attorney's fees, put more money in your pocket. Let's look at attorney's fees on a $250,000 slip and fall settlement that I had. Angela was staying at a hotel near Orlando, Florida, when she got into a bathtub and slipped and fell, and she broke her arm. She shattered it. She had surgery at the hospital. Shortly after she left the hospital, she reached out to my law firm and hired me. I told her there was no attorney's fee or cost if I didn't recover any money in her case. I give that speech to everyone. Angela was nervous. She had a very big injury. She had a hotel that really wasn't accepting fault for the incident, and she needed to hire an attorney. So there were no fees or costs up front. She hired me shortly after the incident, and I went to work for her. I was able to settle her case without a lawsuit, and my attorney's fees and costs together were 33 1/3% of the total settlement. Angela, after my attorney's fees and costs and paying Angela's health insurance company back and paying her out-of-pocket medical bills, she received $157,353 in her pocket. In other words, she received 62 2/3% of the whole settlement. Now, the insurance company's initial offer to us was only $12,500. They put the blame on Angela and said the hotel did nothing wrong. Without an attorney, I don't think she would have gotten much more than that. The adjuster seemed very convincing. I looked online on Google Maps and other sites and saw that some other guests at the same hotel had complained about issues in the bathroom. I sent that to the adjuster, and that helped us get a bigger offer in her case. In Angela's case, my costs were only $35. Again, that's in addition to attorney's fees. Let's take a look at lawyer fees on a $170,000 settlement. Zach was a backseat passenger of a rental car. He lived in West Virginia. He was visiting in Florida, and a friend of the family was driving the rental car near Clearwater, Florida. The driver wasn't paying attention, and he crashed into the car in front of him, and Zach, who was not wearing a seatbelt, went into the seat in front of him and shattered his arm. Zach then went back home and ultimately had surgery in his home state. At the time of the accident, Zach was a minor, so his mother wasn't getting anywhere with the insurance company. Again, it often happens where the insurance company will do whatever they can to delay the claim. They may not tell you, like in this case, that there was any bodily injury liability and coverage available, which is what you want. Bodily injury liability coverage is the coverage that pays you for pain and suffering, medical bills, lost wages, etc. In Zach's case, my costs were almost zero. My attorney's fee was 33 1/3% of the settlement. We had to reimburse one of the medical providers for $43 for Zach's medical bills, and Zach got $113,260 in his pocket. In other words, Zach got 66 2/3% of the entire $170,000 settlement in his pocket. Let's take a look at my car accident lawyer's fees on a $125,000 settlement. Richie was driving a police vehicle going straight. Another driver failed to yield at a stop sign, hit Richie. Richie broke the fifth metacarpal, which is a bone in the hand, and ultimately had to have surgery. He had a pin taken out. He recovered very well from this incident, and we settled the case against the at-fault driver's insurance company, GEICO, for $125,000. Once again, my fees and costs were 33 1/3% of the entire settlement. We had to pay back the workers' compensation lien and out-of-pocket medical bills, $2,866, which is 2% of the settlement. And 64 2/3% of the settlement went to my client. So he got a check for $80,394. Now, he was injured while he was working, but another driver was at fault. So my client's workers' compensation insurer paid a large amount for his medical bills and lost wages. However, because my client had an attorney, the workers' compensation insurer was forced to significantly reduce the amount that they were claiming from the total settlement. Again, it's another advantage to hiring an attorney. Let's look at the car accident lawyer fees on Sarah's case that we settled for $100,000. Another driver insured by GEICO crashed into Sarah's car. The other driver got the ticket, and we settled her case for $100,000. You can see the damage to Sarah's car here. Now, Sarah broke her nose in the accident. She did not need surgery. She also had lower back pain, and she had a nerve block injection. However, she did not have lower back surgery. The doctor recommended surgery, but at the time of the settlement, she did not have it. Again, we settled her case for the at-fault drivers, $100,000 bodily injury liability limits. Sarah, like many drivers in the state of Florida, did not have any uninsured motorist insurance coverage, so there was no other way that we could get more money for her in this case. My attorney's fees and costs were 33 3/4% of the entire settlement. We had to pay back Sarah's health insurance lien and out-of-pocket medical bills for $10,156. Sarah got 56.5% of the entire settlement, so she got $56,504 in her pocket. As you can see from these settlements, oftentimes the client gets more than 50% of the entire settlement in their pocket. Now, there's no guarantee that that happens. Some cases, the cost can be higher than normal. Sometimes clients don't have health insurance, and that can result in them getting less money in their pocket. In Sarah's case, my costs were just $7. That's another common theme you're seeing in many of my settlements. The costs are really, really low. I'm going to give you another example of car accident lawyer fees in a $100,000 settlement. This is a case where it shows you how important it is to get an attorney in an accident case. Now, my client was driving a motorcycle heading straight down the road, and the other driver made a left-hand turn and crashed into him. My client did not take an ambulance to the hospital. In fact, he didn't even go to the hospital. He contacted me. He had some lower back pain, pain in his knee, and pain in his testicle. And he did not have health insurance. He had no idea how he could get medical treatment. So I referred him to a medical group that said we will treat him in exchange for receiving payment at the end of his case. So he ended up having an MRI of his lower back that showed that he had a herniated disc. And GEICO's initial offer was only $5,500. That's very common with GEICO. So if my client did not have an attorney, what would he have done? GEICO wrote a very strong letter outlining why the offer was only $5,500. The GEICO adjuster said my client's herniated disc was not impinging on the spinal cord. In this case, my client also had an MRI of his knee. Now, my client's doctor did not see a meniscus tear. However, when we sent the MRI films of his knee to GEICO, GEICO's doctor surprisingly actually saw on a couple of the different MRI slides a meniscus tear. My client had a bruised testicle. Again, my client did not have health insurance, so I was allowed to pay for a one-time visit to a urologist who examined my client and determined that my client had erectile dysfunction. Ultimately, GEICO paid $100,000 to settle the case, which was their policy limits. Their driver did not have assets, and they did not have any insurance above the $100,000. Like many other drivers in Florida, my client did not have any uninsured motorist insurance coverage. I told GEICO I wouldn't take a penny less than the $100,000 policy limits. We went to mediation, and eventually they offered the $100,000 settlement without a lawsuit. So my attorney's fees were 33.4% of the total settlement. We had to pay back some of my client's medical providers. Fortunately, they reduced the charges significantly, and my client got 56.8% of the total settlement in his pocket. So he got $56,756 in his pocket. So I received $33,494. But again, there's no way my client on his own would have gotten $100,000. In fact, I don't think he would have gotten much more than $5,500 for GEICO's initial offer. He would not have been able to get medical treatment on his own, and he would not have been able to strategize and force GEICO to pay the $100,000 limits. Let's look at a car accident case that I settled for $90,000 where my client got $54,000 in her pocket. My client was a pedestrian in a parking lot when a car hit her. My client Alice complained of pain in her ankle and she had bruising around her eye. An ambulance took Alice to the hospital. She had a CT scan of her head, but there was no bleeding of the brain or any shifting of the brain or anything wrong with her brain. Alice fractured her distal fibula, which is the end of one of your leg bones, the thinner leg bone closest to your ankle. This accident happened in South Florida. After the accident, Alice's relative contacted me. She saw our excellent reviews on Google Maps and she reached out to me and we spoke, and ultimately Alice hired me. Now, in all these different people that reached out to me, they also all got a free consultation. Personal injury attorneys give a free consultation, and typically what happens during the free consultation is I tell you if I'm able to represent you. I only handle cases where someone's injured in Florida or if they live in Florida. Now, Alice did not need surgery for her ankle fracture, and Progressive's opening offer was just $50,000. And the adjuster, when he made that offer, seemed very, very convincing. Another reason to get an attorney is without an attorney, these adjusters can sweet talk you into accepting a settlement, and you could think you're getting a great deal when in fact you are getting hosed and ripped off. Insurance companies make money by paying you as little as possible and saving money, and all that money that they save adds up, and that's why they're billion-dollar corporations. Ultimately, I settled Alice's case for $90,000. You can see the settlement check. Here's a comparison between the $50,000 first offer and the $90,000 settlement. This is very, very common occurrence in many car accident and other types of cases where the final offer is a lot higher than the first offer. However, my experience is from an attorney's point of view, and I don't know how much more an insurance company will offer to someone who doesn't have an attorney. My attorney's fees and cost analysis case were 33 1/3% of the total settlement. After paying Alice's medical bills back and her health insurance lien, she received 60 2/3% of the settlement in her pocket. She got $54,779 in her pocket. We were able to get this $90,000 settlement without suing. Some attorneys may sue just to drive up the attorney's fee to 40% of the total settlement. So you have to be very careful and have a detailed conversation with your attorney about whether they plan on suing, whether they plan on trying to resolve the case without a lawsuit, because in many cases, it can save you a lot of money if you don't have to sue. Now, that said, sometimes it is necessary to sue. In fact, sometimes insurance companies will deny liability and you have no choice other than to sue. Or sometimes the offer is so bad, you're forced to sue in order to get a fair offer. That's your goal in every case, is to get a fair settlement offer, to get fair value. Now we're going to look at lawyers' fees on a $70,000 settlement where my client was a passenger of a Lyft vehicle and another driver crashed into the Lyft vehicle. The other driver had GEICO, had a $25,000 bodily injury liability policy with GEICO. My client had pain in his ankle, pain in his hand, and he did have a CT scan of his head when he went to the hospital. But like most CT scans at the hospital, it did not find anything wrong with his brain. My client did not have surgery in this case. Now, my client was very fortunate. He was a passenger in a Lyft vehicle in Florida at a time where Lyft had uninsured motorist insurance on their policy. Unfortunately, now Lyft has no uninsured motorist insurance on their car insurance policies, at least in Florida where I practice, and the same is true with Uber, unfortunately. We were able to get the other driver's car insurance GEICO to pay $25,000, and Lyft paid $45,000, so that combined to a $70,000 settlement. My attorney's fees and costs combined were 33 1/3% of the settlement. We were able to settle before a lawsuit. My client got $33,608 in his pocket. In other words, he got 48% of the entire $70,000 settlement in his pocket. Now, he did not have health insurance, so we had to pay back the doctors $13,044, but I was able to send my client to doctors who gave him treatment and they agreed to get paid at the end of the case. If my client would have had health insurance, he likely would have gotten a lot more in his pocket. So another common theme you'll see is where people do not have health insurance coverage, they typically get less of the total settlement amount in their pocket. Let's take a look at car accident lawyer fees on a $50,000 settlement where my client was riding a motorcycle. He was riding in Land O'Lakes, Pasco County, Florida when a car hit him. Now, he went to the hospital and he was diagnosed with a collarbone fracture. Fortunately, he did not need surgery. Travelers Insurance Company insured the driver that hit my client, and they had a $50,000 bodily injury liability policy. My client, after the crash, hired me. and we were able to get him the $50,000 policy limits from the traveler's insurance policy. My costs were just $6.59 in this case. So here, my attorney's fees and costs were 33 1/3% of the total settlement, and my client ended up getting $29,235 in his pocket after I was paid my attorney's fees and costs and paid back his final out-of-pocket medical bills and health insurance lien. Now let's look at a smaller case. Most cases involve whiplash or lower back pain. So this is a case that settled for $20,000 because my client did not have an MRI. My client was in a minivan when another vehicle crashed into the back of his car, which sent my client into a wall. Now, my client did take an ambulance to the hospital, and he complained of neck and back pain. Fortunately, my client did not need surgery, and he did not have any broken bones, and he did not even have an MRI. Typically, when you get an MRI, if you're in a heavy impact crash and you're badly hurt, and the other driver has insurance, you're going to get more money if there's a positive finding, meaning the MRI shows something wrong. We were able to get $20,000 from the at-fault driver's insurance company, GEICO, and you can see the settlement check here. Once again, my costs were only $7 in this case. Now, my attorney's fees and costs were about 33 1/3% of the total settlement, and that means that my client got around 36% of the total settlement in his pocket. Now, my client Caesar did not have health insurance, so as you've already seen, he ended up getting less money in his pocket, like many of the other individuals who I represented who did not have health insurance. Caesar ended up getting over $7,250 in his pocket, and he was very happy with the settlement. Now, for those of you that are concerned and are debating, should I hire an attorney for my car accident or other personal injury case? You may want to look at this Insurance Research Council study, which said that people with a lawyer got 3.5 times a larger settlement than those without a lawyer. Now, bigger cases typically have more costs. As you can imagine, someone who has a horrific brain injury and is going to need a life care planner to talk about all the costs that they're going to need for the remainder of their life, the costs in their case are going to be more expensive. Just like a case involving a large truck and bad injuries, you may need accident reconstructionists, someone to download the event data recorder of the truck or other vehicles involved, so cases can get expensive. For any large cost, the attorney should be getting the client's approval prior to spending large amounts of money on costs. In fact, before an attorney files a lawsuit in the state of Florida, they need their client's consent. So I can't just sue for a client in an attempt to drive up the attorney's fee to 40% without my client's consent. Some of the common costs that can get charged in car accident and personal injury cases are costs to get the police report, costs to get your medical records. However, if you get your own medical records, it can often be a lot less expensive than having the attorney request it. Here's a tip. Ask your attorney if they charge for copies that they make in their office. We don't charge for copies that we make in the office. Unless it's an extreme circumstance, we do not charge for copies that I make in my office. Especially now that almost everything gets scanned, there's really not a huge need to make copies. Some attorneys can charge 25 cents or more for copies, and that can add up so quickly. If you're getting value out of this video, please hit the like button. Here's another tip. Before you hire an attorney, ask them if they are going to list every single one of their costs in your closing statement. Now, the closing statement is the document that you sign at the end of your claim if you have a settlement or recovery, and it shows the attorney's fee, the attorney's costs, and all the payments the attorney's making for all the medical providers and other individuals in the case. Do not allow them to just list one big, large blanket number, like $20,000 for costs or $2,000 for costs, and just say, hey, these are the costs. One thing that I found has been very helpful is while the case is going on, and I incur an expense, we do our best to email my clients a copy of the costs that we've incurred. This way, when it comes time to settlement, my client isn't shocked about what the costs are. They know about the costs. And again, if there's any large expense to be had, I get my client's consent prior to spending the money. I have realized over practicing for many years, that's how you have the happiest clients. So long as the clients are informed, they're typically very happy. Now, I know that people watching this video are concerned about attorney's fees, which is totally understandable. One advantage of hiring an attorney, if you are an employee of the county, the city, or the state, for a state like Florida, which is where I practice, the health insurance company is going to want to get paid at the end of the case. and they have to reduce the amount that they pay for your medical bills by your attorney's fees and costs. That can result in a huge savings to the injured person. So I recommend prior to hiring an attorney, ask them what black and white savings they think they're going to be able to get for you in the case. I'm not talking about just getting a larger settlement potentially. I'm talking about, will their health insurance company or will your workers' compensation insurance company have to reduce their lien just because you have an attorney? In Florida, that's often the case. Now, in Florida, an attorney cannot charge an attorney's fee on medical payments coverage that is recovered. So let's say that you slip and fall or are injured at a premises and they have medical payments coverage on the policy. That's one of the two types of coverage that applies in personal injury cases on their policy. If the insurance company sends a check for medical payments coverage, the attorney cannot charge a fee on the medical payments coverage unless the attorney files a lawsuit. This is good news for clients because it's less money from the total settlement that they have to pay the attorney. Some past clients or potential clients have asked me in the past whether they're going to get less money in their pocket than the attorney, myself, is going to get, or than their doctors are going to get. My goal as a personal injury attorney is to put as much money in your pocket as possible. So my goal is for you to get significantly more money in your pocket than my attorney's fees. Now, that being said, there is a chance that the attorney's fees end up being the same amount as the amount of money that you recover in your pocket, and that typically is much more likely to happen if you do not have health insurance or Medicaid or Medicare. This is because we're going to have to pay money to the doctors from the settlement. If you lose your case, there are a couple situations where you may have to pay charges, typically to the defense attorney. That would be if the defense is able to get the judge to dismiss your case prior to trial, or if you lose at trial. However, you typically have the option to dismiss your case prior to the judge throwing out your case or you losing at trial. Now, sometimes after settlement, your health insurance company or Medicare or Medicaid has paid a large amount towards your medical bills and they want to get money back. An attorney cannot hire another company to reduce those fees and have the other company charge you for a percentage of the amount that they're able to reduce your liens. The one exception is if the court approves this. So your attorney would need to write to the judge and ask for court approval saying, I've done everything I can to try to get these liens resolved and we've hit an impasse. And then if the judge approves it, that's allowed. But before a lawsuit, an attorney cannot hire one of these companies to try to reduce your medical bills or your health insurance lien or Medicare or Medicaid lien and then have that company charge you a reverse contingency fee. It's not allowed in the state of Florida where I practice. But again, if a judge allows it, then an attorney is allowed to have one of those companies charge you for that. Let me give you an example of a case that I handled where we would not have been allowed to use a company to reduce my client's Medicaid lien. My client, Shankiva, was a passenger in a car in Holly Hill, Florida, when another driver struck the car in front of her, which then hit her car, and she had an acetabulum fracture, which is a fracture around the hip. She did not need surgery, fortunately. Unfortunately, like many cases, there was not enough insurance to pay her for the value of her claims, so we received $25,000 from uninsured motorist insurance of the vehicle that she was in, and the other driver who caused the accident had $10,000, which needed to get split between her, Shankiva, and the driver of her car. So Shankiva got $8,000 and the driver got the remaining $2,000. Now, Shankiva had Molina Medicaid, which paid $1,849 towards her medical bills. I could not recommend a company for Shankiva to use to try to get that amount reduced and then try to charge Shankiva for the savings. In this case, I was able to get Molina Medicaid to accept $1,085.32. This puts $764 more in Shankiva's pocket. I was not allowed to hire another company and then have them charge her 33 1/3% or whatever they charge of the savings. Be careful and ask your attorney prior to hiring them whether they're going to hire a company to try to get your health insurance lien down, Medicare and Medicaid, and charge you for that difference, or have that company charge a percent of the savings. In Florida, where I practice, it's not allowed unless a judge okays it. Florida courts have said that reducing your health insurance liens and Medicaid liens and Medicare liens, it's part of a personal injury attorney such as myself. It's my responsibility. I can't just farm it out or send it out to another company to do it, and then they charge you a reverse contingency fee. Again, the only exception is if a judge allows it. So in Shankiva's case, I was able to get Melina Medicaid to accept a fraction of what they paid towards her medical bills. So I saved Shankiva an extra $764 by getting Melina Medicaid to accept less money for their lien. And the good news for Shankiva, I didn't charge her an extra penny for that. So if you're about to sign a fee contract in the state of Florida and the attorney's fee contract says that the attorney can charge you for outsourcing your health insurance lien negotiation or Medicare lien negotiation, you should add in the words subject to court approval. The best time to address this is before hiring the attorney. Now, we do not charge any additional fees for paralegal fees. However, if the court were to award us paralegal fees, that would be an exception to that rule. I do not charge an attorney's fee for consulting with an appellate attorney. Appellate attorneys are attorneys that handle appeals. The exception where I do charge for an appellate attorney is if there's an appeal in the case. Then we can charge an additional 5% attorney's fee for the appellate attorney. But I don't charge just for picking up the phone or emailing an appellate lawyer during my personal injury case. If there hasn't been an appeal in your case, do not let an attorney charge you for an appellate attorney. We do not charge for long distance calls or faxes. Always ask your attorney if they're going to charge for those. They can add up very, very quickly. The one exception would be if I have a client in some remote part of the world and there's no way to speak with them without long distance phone, then we would charge for that. But nowadays with Zoom, FaceTime, WhatsApp, and other forms of communication, there's not a need to charge clients for long distance calls. If we're able to settle your case, we do not charge a fee for preparing the closing statement. In the state of Florida, an attorney cannot charge you an additional fee or cost for preparing the closing statement. Preparing the closing statement is part of a personal injury attorney's job. We do not charge a fee for storing your file at the end of a case. I've heard of attorneys that charge fees for storing your file. This is something that you should ask them about if they have it in their fee contract. If an attorney does charge you a fee for storing your file, it needs to be the exact amount of money that the attorney has to pay to store that file. So how do you know which charges are excessive in a personal injury case, meaning charges that an attorney cannot ethically charge you in a personal injury case? What I recommend is looking at the fee contract on Legal Fuel, which is a website in conjunction with the Florida Bar, and they have a very basic contingency fee agreement. In a perfect world, your personal injury attorney's fee agreement should be very similar to that. The problem is, through time, attorneys share fee contracts, and some attorneys try to add these clauses in there that are unethical and they're not okay. And respected attorneys may do this not even knowing that the clauses aren't okay, because potentially they get the fee contract from another respected attorney, and the pattern goes on and on and on. But the fee contract should be very basic, and if there's anything in there that is not in the fee contract on the Legal Fuel website, I suggest you speak with the attorney about it. I'm going to have a link in the description to the fee contract that's on the Legal Fuel website. So that shows you the standard basic attorney's fee contract in a personal injury case. It's typically a good sign if your attorney's fee contract is very short, around 2 to 3 pages. Attorney's fees are just one thing to consider in a personal injury case. You need to know how to maximize and value the entire case and deal with the insurance company. Watch this video here to maximize the value of your personal injury case and increase your chances at getting as much money as possible.